Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about functions in Python. So to make a function, you need to have the keyword def and then the name of your functions, or in this case, I'm going to make a very simple one called boring function. And it's boring because there is no input arguments. You would put your input arguments usually inside the parentheses, and then you have your colon to do something, and then in this case, I'm just going to print something and say that I am useless. So if you see here and I call my function and run it, you can see here it prints out I am useless. Okay, so you see right now when I hover over it, it doesn't tell you much about the function, but if you want to add some information, type your um, comments here. You could type it inside if you want it to pop up when you hover over your function, or if you're following some sort of documentation method, you may have it inside or outside of the function. So figure out what you plan on doing. But this is supported by Python natively. Um, so that's for a simple function. And then maybe you have a function where you have some input parameters. So here I'm going to have a function called def and then gain some muscle. And input, I'm going to have current weight. And then second parameter is called pure muscle. And we're going to assume that these data types are going to be floats. So you have new weight equals current weight plus pure muscle. And I'm going to print your new weight. Your new weight is, and then new weight. So if I run that, you see that when you first call it, so gain some muscle. And you see that error, missing 2 arguments, so you need to put in your arguments here. So I'm just gonna say, for example, 160, and let's say 5 pounds of muscle. So you can see here your new weight is 165. Okay, so that's how you would call a function with some parameters inside. And sometimes for good practice, you could, depending on your documentation method, you could do something like function and then say the name of your function. And you could define your input values, for example. So current weight, specify as a float in pounds. So that way when you look back, you know what the heck you were doing. And here I'm going to have pure muscle float in pounds. And then maybe you specify what it returns. So in this case, we have new weight also float in pounds. So now when you look back at your comments, you'll know what the heck you were doing and you won't be confused what you're working with. So ever since Python 3.5, they started supporting typing, which specifies the type of your functions. So here you could actually create something new. I'm just going to call this fancy, and you could actually declare what type you're working with. So you could say colon float here, and then you could do float, and you could specify the return type with a dash and an arrow, and then also say float, for example. And if I were to duplicate this function here and call this fancy, and I run this, missing a colon here. So if I run this, you can see that it prints out the same thing. So the main thing special about this is you can see your data types here, float, float, return is float, and that way it kind of supplements your coding. And you could either double up in comments or you could see what it does explicitly here because it's defined. Okay, so that's with typing. And then other things is if you have variable input arguments. So let's say here we have something called def and then magic recipe. And inside it's going to be your favorite foods. So maybe I just want to print out my favorite foods. So for x in favorite recipes or for X and favorite foods, I'm going to say print X. Okay, so I'm going to call that function. I might have something that looks like, let's say magic recipe, and then maybe I have galbi gem, and I have eggs, and maybe some Korean barbecue. So if I run this, you see that it prints out my foods. So one thing to note is that this thing here is actually a tuple. So if I were to, run it in debug, you can see here if I hover over favorite foods, it's a tuple. And you could also confirm here by type favorite foods. You see it's a tuple. So to access a tuple, you would use also the brackets. So you can see the first favorite food is galbi gem, the second is eggs, and so on. Okay, so that's how you look at your variable arguments. So sometimes you might have variable length arguments where the keyword is known. So in that case, you would have 2 stars. So let's make a new function. I'm going to call this color mixer. And I'm going to put 2 stars here and have color names. So this is good when you're expecting certain keywords and maybe you only want to execute certain actions if that keyword is provided. So let's say we're expecting up to 3 colors. So I could say like if, first in color names. So here one thing to note is that unlike with variable arguments with a star, with 2 is they actually treat this as a dictionary. So we'll show you in a bit, but this is just a check to see if the keys exist. So if the key exists, then you could actually execute. So I could say first color is, and then color names first, for example, and then I could duplicate this. And here maybe I'll do a second, and then here maybe I'll do a third. So inside my function here, I could call color mixer, and then I could specify a few that I want to try out. So maybe I have first equals blue, and then let's say third equals red or something. Okay, so if I run this, you see that first color is blue, third color is red, and it skips a second because I didn't provide it. But let's say I did provide it. Let's just say green, for example. So if I run this now, not in debug. Let me run this again. So if I run it, you can see that it prints out all 3 colors. Okay, so this is how you use the variable length arguments with known keywords. And like I said, it's a dictionary. So, if I were to put a breakpoint here and then F5, you could see that inside here, color names is a dict. And you could confirm that also by going to the debug console and just type, I'm going to say color names. You can see it's a dictionary. Okay, and you could access the items in there by doing what we did before with dictionaries. And maybe you want to see the second one, so you could see that you access it like a dictionary. Okay, so that summarizes the things for functions. So we saw functions with no parameters, functions with 2 parameters, functions with typing, functions with variable length arguments, and functions with keywords, variable length arguments. So that'll be all for functions, and see you in the next one.